Good afternoon. Our first talk this afternoon will be Flexible Case Design and Tiered Levels of Case Function at the Autry Museum of the American West, presented both by Jennifer Kim and Sarah Signorovich. Jennifer Kim is a conservator specializing in objects at the Autry Museum of the American West in Los Angeles. Prior to joining the Autry in 2012, she was a conservator at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Margaret Herrick Library. She's led workshops for the Society of California Archivists and elsewhere to provide practical exhibition preparation and preservation training to staff at small archives and libraries. She received an MA in Art History and CAS in Conservation from the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University. And then Sarah Signorovich is the Loans and Exhibitions Registrar and Traveling Exhibition Coordinator at the Autry Museum of the American West. She has been involved in the intricacies of exhibition work at the Autry since 2007, overseeing logistics and care for temporary and long-term loans to the collection, as well as outgoing loans and traveling exhibitions. Ms. Signorovich holds a BA in Fine Art and Art History from the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences, George Washington University, and an MFA from Claremont Graduate University. So, Jennifer. It's a clicker if you want.
Okay.
You can use the screen.
Is there a pointer by any
The pointer
chance?
is right there at the top.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
red.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Jennifer, and as Chris mentioned, I'm the conservator at the Autry Museum of the American West. And I just want to point out that some of the schedules still say Autry National Center, and we actually just had a name change. So you'll excuse the confusion there. Today, my colleague Sarah and I are going to share a collaborative language created to expedite communication between departments that are involved in exhibition planning. So let's set the scene. The Autry Museum in LA is a medium-sized history museum that presents a wide range of exhibitions. The majority of exhibition furniture used throughout the museum is fabricated in-house. We have two changing galleries for temporary shows. Today we're focusing on obstacles faced during the planning of our show, Empire and Liberty, the Civil War in the West, which opened on April 25th of this year in the George Montgomery Gallery, a 5,500 square foot space. So we're going to start this story in early 2014 when the majority of the object checklist was complete, loans were being sussed out, and preliminary design discussions were still happening. At this point, we were faced with several challenges. The HVAC system in our temporary gallery was not meeting our climate standards. Also, two previously acceptable materials used for interior case construction failed our in-house Oddy retests. Furthermore, as the curatorial narrative was unfurled, it was clear that some cases would be housing artifacts that could off-gas next to other artifacts made of incompatibly sensitive materials. Now, as these problems we faced are not uncommon individually, we will not dwell on aspects of our response that are already covered thoroughly by others in the conservation literature. Instead, we're going to focus on elements of teamwork and implementation that were unique to our specific situation in hopes that it might help others. Okay, so let's get to some specifics about these obstacles. Our assistant conservator extraordinaire, Özge Üstün, performs our in-house Oddy testing. And she has adapted Brooklyn Museum's procedure for our needs. So as Samantha mentioned earlier, her protocol and some of the results that we mentioned today will be available on the AIC Oddy wiki page. Eventually we'll have more uploaded, but that's gonna be a while. The first major interior case material that failed our retesting is moderately expanded closed-cell PVC foam board, commonly referred to by a popular brand name Sintra. Just wait. Not all expanded PVC foam board is Sintra, and so I'm going to specifically refer to it as PVC foam board, and I'm only going to say Sintra if I'm talking specifically about Sintra brand. But I just want to say that it is commonly referred to as Sintra, and you have to be really careful, especially when you're dealing with distributors, that when you say Sintra, you're getting Sintra, because I think in many places and in many fabrication studios, those two words are used interchangeably, regardless of what brand you're using. Since we don't have the ventilation infrastructure to apply effective barrier coatings on ply or MDF, We use the foam board for lining, case interiors, building decks, and risers. Now, the foam board brands, as I mentioned, our distributor would supply to us varied, but when we tested in 2009 and again in 2011, our Oddy tests passed the batches that we received. In January of 2014, however, the sample we tested failed. So our fabrications department went back to our distributor to specifically ask for Sintra, which was not available to us in our region. And we're just not a large enough institution to order enough that they would supply it to us. So they asked for other brands of PVC foam board for us to test. Simultaneously, the conservation department reached out to other institutions, asking them if they would be willing to retest our samples in order to check if perhaps our Oddy protocol was problematic. Actually, Greg Smith later today will be probably addressing that at some point in his talk. But none of the board samples that we tested subsequently passed. And again, none of them were specifically Sintra. There was Celtec and Freefoam. And we did retest multiple times. Now, this was a pretty hard blow to all of us. But before we go on, I just want to mention that the other material that failed is Regal Select latex interior paint from Benjamin Moore, which we had been using in case interiors. We were using it because it had appeared on various exhibit materials lists that our preparator had referred to, but when we did actual in-house testing, we found that the Regal formulation that's currently available to us in California failed. I should note that California has some pretty strict rules on paint, so that really doesn't apply to any other state, I don't think. Now, regarding our climate issues, if you want to guffaw, our HVAC system is circa 1986. Our HVAC system is circa 1986 with an extravagant number of air handlers that run on pneumatic controls. New boilers were added in 2007, and the system is due to be updated again soon. However, like many major infrastructure improvements, it can take some time and is not always in time for everything. In this instance, the updates were not going to be in place for this exhibition. So here's a comparison of the RH levels from years ago when the Autry first installed a digital data logger in that temporary gallery, as opposed to over the course of the year leading up to July 2014. Just for reference, that white window is the 40 to 55% range, so it's not the 40 to 60% agreed upon in 2014 at the IIC and ICOM-CC conference, but we're still easily outside of that range also. Our climate problems could lead our collection and potential loans vulnerable to damage from both rapid fluctuation as well as RH extremes. At this point, I think it's fair to say that many people were deeply concerned. You could say we were at a crossroads. Our budgets were already planned well in advance. We had an expectation that we would be building casework in-house for the most part, and our fabrication staff and equipment are all geared towards building casework with exterior plywood construction that is sealed off and built up with painted PVC foam board interiors. We had also not systematically needed to buffer our cases, so they historically had not been built to house such materials. So essentially, we had to get organized very quickly. And Sarah is going to talk about how we did in the clutch.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a registrar. Are there any other registrars or collections managers here?
Yay!
Okay, a few.
I thought you were a unicorn.
So maybe you have a similar group at your organization that gets together to review display needs and issues. Ours, the artifact team, is made up of representatives from the departments listed here. In addition to being part of the full team during the early phases of exhibition development, the artifact team meets to review exhibition feasibility once the preliminary design for an exhibition is in place. Each representative comes to the table with their own, sometimes overlapping concerns. For this particular exhibition, early on in the development process, due to the problems that Jen had just described, Each representative on the artifact team wanted the following. A collections wanted case design that allowed objects to be easily and safely installed and maintain the lender's climate requirements for each object, as well as best possible conditions for our own objects. Conservation wanted cases made of inert materials that could be sealed if needed, with exterior access to a chamber that could house mitigants such as desiccants and adsorbents. Curatorial wanted the objects that they had selected displayed in an accessible and story-integrated way. Fabrication wanted to be able to retrofit and reuse existing case stock, and any new build cases needed to be made of easily producible, in-house, readily available materials, as well as be reusable for the next show. Exhibition design wanted cases that complemented the current design of the galleries, as well as wanting aesthetic control of interior case materials, textures, and colors. We also had a couple of shared concerns. These are big ones. I'm sure you can all relate. Budget and schedule, just kind of the constant. Now, on the path to finding a solution that synthesized each department's needs, the first step in our process was coming to an agreement, actually really acknowledging as a group that due to budget and schedule restraints, number one, we can't fix the climate in time for the show. We can't find miracle Oddy passing case materials that fit our budget for the show. Step two was acknowledging, again, as a group, that we can't have everything that we want. For collections and conservation, this was accepting that all cases cannot be of the same quality. Now, in order to find a solution to move us forward, we had to open up to learning what everyone's wants were, separate out the actual needs, and understand what made them important. This involved a lot of hands-on demonstrations, FaceTime, not the app, real FaceTime. For example, conservation explained the Oddy test process to everyone on the artifact team, as a lot of them really weren't familiar with it. Fabrication walked conservation through the case build process, really simple. Just come down to the shop and see how we do it. Through this exercise, stepping back from our silos, we could see each department's parameters mapping out a new path. Kind of a blueprint for a menu of case functions which we could use to our mutual advantage. And this was a really big deal for us because, as Jennifer mentioned, previous to this exhibition, we had not had the need or the push or even the interdepartmental buy-in to create customized enclosures for objects. And now we're finally doing that and doing it in a way that worked for everyone. Now, moving forward with our exciting new plans, the next step for collections and conservation was the creation of a way to clarify our expectations for what each case should be doing. Basically, distilling case requirement information into a set of tiers to minimize guesswork on the exhibit design and fabrication side. We established a classification of 4 tiers. The bottom economy tier, tier 4, is our starting point and covers the build styles and fittings that we were using at the time. And of course, we could only go up from there. The top tier, to borrow some terms from the automotive industry again, is the Cadillac. It's what we, the conservation and collections departments, would want to have for all the cases, but is not within the realities of budget and schedule. Now, the tiers in between, tier 2 and 3, were the fruit of compromise. This is the actual document created and circulated to the artifact team. No, you don't have to read it right now. I have a few handouts later if you are interested. But you'll notice from a brief glance that we use simple, direct, user-friendly language and descriptions. This is a shared language. It's the collaborative vocabulary that Jen mentioned earlier, but it also represents our new shared understanding of what we all do and what we all need. We still use this document today. We can say, hey, we need that to be tier 2, and somebody that is not a conservator or a collections manager will understand what we're talking about. And we'll go through exactly what makes up each tier in a moment. Now, after having established the tiers, the next step for collections and conservation was matching artifact needs with the tiers and communicating those needs to the folks involved with designing, building, and retrofitting the cases. Case tier assignments were made by conservation based on the preferred environment for the most sensitive object in each case set. Due to external access requirements identified for Tier 1 and Tier 2, our existing case stock couldn't be retrofitted to create them, and a new flex case style able to accommodate Tiers 1 through 3 was designed in-house by our designer Eugene Wyrick, which Jennifer will be describing in detail shortly. Now, throughout the case layout finalization process, we also made sure that any object switches would trigger a re-review of case tier assignments, and the flexibility of the new case that we had designed made these object switches much less problematic. Now, Tier 4, oops, what happened? Close the program.
Yeah,
Okay. Did you open that?
No.
Trying to go on Facebook or something?
Basically.
The economy tier, as I mentioned previously, describes existing case styles which could not be efficiently retrofitted for various reasons, but could receive some amount of silicon-activated carbon during install within an improvised compartment. Fortunately for Empire and Liberty, we didn't even need to make any Tier 4 assignments, and this image is actually an example of a case from one of our previous exhibitions, which qualifies as a Tier 4.
I'm just going to talk about the materials that went in specifically. So these are the materials that were specified for Tier 4. They're more or less the same as the old case buildup, as Sarah mentioned, but with some changes. The subdeck is constructed of a high-pressure laminate-lined MDF. We continued the use of the painted PVC foam board for the deck because qualitatively the failed foam board coupons still did appear to fare better than those of MDF or ply. However, we did modify our paint choice from the Regal. The paint that we selected for our Tier 4 specs, Ben by Benjamin Moore, did not outright pass the Oddy test, but the coupons overall appeared better than compared to those of Regal. That level of nuance may not translate in our posted Oddy results, and this sort of highlights the benefit of talking to the actual Oddy test performer, especially if you're using shared results. And it's just a thought to consider as the Oddy wiki takes off. I know for us that, you know, if you do refer to some Oddy results that Ozge has posted, she would love it if you emailed her to talk about them and exactly what they mean and how we've utilized it, or just to make sure that the results are being appropriately used. And I think we would do the same if for example, if one of our preps came and said, hey, I saw this paint on that wiki page that you said that they said passed, that's great, but I think that we would probably still go ahead and do our own in-house Oddy test if we couldn't maybe get in touch with the person or know who the person is who performed the original Oddy test that's on the wiki page. Which, you know, I think we all sort of would try to rise to that standard.
Thanks, Jen. Tier 3, Economy Plus, airflow, is assigned to objects which need or can withstand exchange with gallery air. In this example, a leather saddle. For the Empire and Liberty exhibition, the Tier 3 assignments encompassed a mixture of new build flex cases, where the external access panel was replaced by a grate, as well as large platform cases, which were too big to effectively seal with the resources we have in-house. So now, Jen, talk about the materials.
These are essentially the same. The only difference is that there is still no gasketing on the case, intentional gasketing on the case, and the access panel has been swapped out with a polypropylene grate.
This is an example of the Tier 3 platform style. You'll notice that the hardware we use to create this size of enclosure does not create an effective seal. Tier 2 Sport Edition, the most widely used tier in our Empire and Liberty exhibition, was planned to create a controlled interior for RH and pollutant reactive artifacts. It has a chamber accessible from underneath the case for silica and activated carbon with passive airflow to the case interior. Tier 2 allows for the use of non-passing paint and expanded PVC board, as these were the materials that the case build budget had been based on. Activated carbon used in this situation is intended to adsorb pollutants in the case interior potentially caused by those non-passing materials, in addition to off-gassing from the artifacts themselves. Now, this example here is a Tier 2 with 5-sided vitrine, and the seal on this style of Tier 2 was more successful than this 4-sided vitrine style shown here. And of course, while I do love this style for the ease of placing the bonnet as it slides in, rather than lifting it above the objects, the expanded PVC board back on this case, and we found out didn't provide the stiffness needed to seat well with the plexiglass. Tier 2B, Sport Light, was created in conversation with the exhibition fabrication department to allow reuse of select existing cases which could be retrofitted to meet the requirements of Tier 2, but where it was not possible to work in exterior access to the silica and activated carbon chamber. So in this example, all of the mitigants are under the deck, unfortunately not accessible without removing the artifact.
So for tiers 2 and 2B, the subdeck materials were the same as the previous tiers, with the additional possibility of a Marvasil wrapped MDF or a bare PVC foam board. And the deck material remained the same, painted PVC foam board. There is gasketing on these cases, however, to make the buffering more effective. Now, at the time of construction, the only gasket we tested that passed the Oddy and was also within our budget was a white Velara. However, design was not happy with its appearance, thus for these Tier 2s, a non-passing gray silicone gasket was used. However, the fabrication team did recently source a cheaper black gasket that passes, so we can use that in the future, and it should be relatively simple to change that out on these cases.
Okay, so ready for Tier 1? The Cadillac. So Tier 1 has all the benefits of the Tier 2 with the added advantage of containing only Oddy pass materials. The silica and activated carbon compartment also has room for the placement of a data logger probe. In Empire and Liberty exhibition, Tier 1 reserved for key loan objects requiring strict environmental parameters. Now, displayed in this Tier 1 is a circa 1874 weaving attributed to Juanita, wife of Dine Chief Manuelito. It was really critical to the exhibition narrative to secure this loan. The textile was brought to Washington, D.C. by Juanita as part of a Navajo delegation to meet with Ulysses S. Grant to negotiate a return to Navajo lands. The Autry collection includes a bill dress woven and worn by Juanita, which was being exhibited with the flag weaving for the first time. And great-great-granddaughter of Juanita, Dr. Jennifer Nez Dentondale, had contributed an essay to the exhibition publication. So it was really a privilege to have the opportunity to borrow this textile to tell this important woman's story in this context. The Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History Department of Anthropology graciously granted the loan of this textile and was willing to work with us in consideration of our climate problems. The requirements attached to the loan were part of the standards which helped shape the final design of this Tier 1 case. And I have to mention, I did notice that there are some representatives here from Brigid Mount Making. The mount for this was made by Erica Johnson. She was great to work with.
So these are the Oddy pass materials that were reserved for the Tier 1 case. So the subdeck is still an HBL or Marvasil lined MDF or a PVC foam board that is lined. The deck is now Marvasil wrapped PVC foam board covered in a Creation Bauman fabric, and the bonnet is plexi seated on gaskets of the white Velara. At this point, I'm going to talk about the flex case design that Sarah mentioned and which you've seen glimpses of in some of these previous slides. This is the new case that was created by our designer, Eugene Wyrick, who is in the audience, and was made specifically for this show. Okay, so previously, cases built in-house were designed around curatorial design and fabrication needs largely. So these are a few examples of cases built in-house within the last 5 years. None of these were built to intentionally create a sealed interior environment, and there is only one point of access to the inside for all of the styles. Now, practical goals with the new case style were adaptability to different deck treatments and reusability in subsequent shows, regardless of the climate desired inside. Furthermore, the majority of the case parts still had to be fabricated in-house. So, let's see. This is a cross-section of the flex case that Jean ultimately designed, and this lower portion is what we've been referring to as the subdeck down here. This upper portion is what we've been referring to as the deck. The pink section is the compartment where the buffers and or adsorbents could be placed, and the purple area is the gasketed access panel. And so you can see there's a generous gap on the side of the deck for passive airflow. The deck and subdeck sides are visible through the plexi, but shielded for the most part by a label rail that's not pictured in this cross-section. You can still see it if you peer over, but our designer felt that it was unnecessary to hide the inner core of the case body, and that transparency about its function and build was actually desirable for him. For all these newly built flex cases, the subdeck and deck were all PVC foam board treated in the various ways to achieve the different tier standards. So, for example, let's say that this cross-section is a tier 2 right now. That would mean that none of this foam board, these white pieces, are lined in any way, and the surfaces, any surface that's visible through the plexi, including the deck surface, is painted. To make it a tier 3, we would simply replace the access panel with a grate. But then to change it to tier 1, anything pink or exposed to the interior would be wrapped in Marvaseal, and the areas visible through the plexi would be wrapped in the appropriate exhibition fabric. This is not an insignificant amount of effort for our fabrication staff, so tier 1 was used very sparingly. So this is a peek at one corner of the show. You can see a range of tiers utilized here. And just as an aside, I really want to emphasize how just talking about all the different artifact needs and cases during construction and installation would have been incredibly frustrating if we hadn't created this sort of shorthand vocabulary. These green boxes in particular are the flex design cases, so you can see the different looks and effects achievable with the same style. Now, just moving on to the actual case climate mitigation materials briefly, to help determine the amount of buffering material we would use, we made an effort to measure the effectiveness of one of our older cases at mitigating the RH fluctuations without any additional buffering material. So these are the results of what's essentially an economy style case. There's no intentional gasketing, but it's a tabletop style case that's relatively tightly constructed. And these readings are during the run of the show that was in the temporary gallery prior to 2014. Oh, yes, more. You can see that the severe spikes in the gallery were effectively mitigated inside the case. So taking this into consideration, these are the materials we used inside, so there's nothing new here. But how did everything do? This is a snapshot of the readings in September, October of this year. So as Sarah mentioned, the four-sided bonnet we were having gasket seal problems with was less steady and mirrored that gallery RH more, but we felt that the spikes were leveled out enough that the artifacts in this cases would be safe from dimensional changes. And the drift had gone up a little bit, so we replenished the silica gel after these readings. And this is a close-up of the Cadillac case through the run of the show, for the entire run of the show through October. Regarding the replenishment of the activated carbon, we don't have a dosimeter, but we placed 80 strips as well as copper and silver coupons into 2 cases to serve as a bellwether for how the carbon was performing. And we didn't see any visible change so far, so thus far we feel satisfied with the performance of the amount we put in.
So, what did we gain and what did we learn from all of this? Back to that shared language and shared understanding, our process of building, designing, and designating materials for casework is now integrated between departments. Thanks to that collaboration, we now have a framework in place for evaluating new materials and retesting existing materials in advance. That framework includes regular materials testing meetings that all affected departments participate in. This is important because before this, conservation was actually the only department concerned with the use of inert materials in case interiors, so that's great to have that. Tested and approved materials are now available for reference by the Autry artifact team on a living list, which has time protection, so the information can't be mistaken for current when it's not. And
Yes, so going forward, we are going to determine if we can continue to use PVC foam board. We may look further into making barrier coatings for wood more feasible or pursue other solutions. So we still haven't totally determined how we're going to handle that. Additionally, even in a world with perfect case materials and perfect climate, exhibitions utilizing mixed collections such as ours may always be complicated. So curators may want to have a leather artifact next to a photo in a single case, and so having the flexibility and being able to track case needs with our tiers is always going to be helpful for us, regardless. So, and thank you to our various colleagues, especially Mr. Antonio Claustro at the top of that list, who basically built every single case.
Okay, now we have our first panel session of the conference, and so I'd like to call all the speakers up from this morning and the two who just completed. And also, by the way, thanks for the talk you just gave. It's very good. So that would be 6 speakers, and please take a seat up at the table here. And then we'll start entertaining questions from the attendees. And if we could have the lights up so we can all see each other. Thank you. And there will be 2 microphones, one on this side and one on this side of the auditorium. So, and I will call out for people to ask the questions.
yeah.
So do we have any questions for the speakers? There's one here. She's got a microphone. She'll bring it right to you.
Hi. This question is for Sarah, and I want to say Jennifer, but I'm really bad with names. Okay. So you have shown us kind of the different fluctuations in relative humidity in your gallery system, or in your gallery spaces. How does that work in your storage area? Do you have that kind of fluctuation with
No, actually, sorry. I ran out, I had to cut some stuff out, but our storage is actually much more stable. They're run on different air handlers, so, and the pace units, the ancient pace units that run it are separate, so it's just, that gallery happens to also be very near an exterior door, so I think it's just like fighting a lot more exterior fluctuation, and it's just kind of time for it to be updated.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, here in the front. I guess Jamie. And if you could please, when you're asking a question, identify yourself and also your function in your institution, because the idea is we want to encourage people from different departments and different sections of the museum's organizations to talk to each other and see what their perspectives are. So.
Okay, I'm Beth Edelstein from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm an objects conservator, and I work in a huge institution, obviously, with a lot of people and a lot of moving parts. And I don't really have a question, but I wanted everybody to maybe talk a little bit more about experiences communicating with the other people involved. I think, it's really great that you guys talked about having a team and the successes that you had there, but I think it's something I'd like to hear a little bit more discussion about those kinds of conversations, because I feel like often, with the variability of the Oddy test, people tend to sort of think, well, that doesn't matter. They disregard the results, or they, I don't know, have issues with listening to you, or
I think it's true.
Well, back when we were using expanded PVC foam board and believing in it, It was hard. It was like kind of a hard conversation to convince fabrication that they needed to budget for that. So then when it failed, that might have upended some of their faith in Jen. Sorry, I just.
No, it's Osgay. It's an Osgay.
Hi, Osgay. And so it was a challenge to kind of build that back up, and that's when we kind of stepped back and said, okay, what does everyone want here? And what do we really have to do all of this with the challenges that we're facing?
Other questions? Yes.
Well, I was just.
Or if you have to continue.
Well, I was just going to say that, and Emily can back me up. I feel like we've always had a really good relationship with everybody. We meet pretty frequently, and it seems like we're kind of all on board at the same time and sharing information as we're proceeding. And I think we almost always can. Maybe we don't always get what we want, but we always try to work things out. And we've never wanted to be the conservators that say, no, you can't do that. We try to be creative, and I know it's been really interesting for me to, when we have these really big teams where it's just beyond the designers and the fabricators, but when we have people from education and even the bigger picture, you really see what all is involved beyond just the exhibit. It's all the other things that go on too. So I feel like that's really informed some of my decisions, and it's always good to see the really big picture.
I'm going to say something because I stole the microphone. I'm Jennifer Bosworth from the Freer and Sackler Galleries. And I'm the exhibitions conservator and have worked with various people here on various Oddy testing related things. And I think just the reaction to the comment about Sintra failed the Oddy test after, NMAI said, now we rely on Sintra, sort of encapsulates this drama that we're all dealing with in our life right now.
I just wanted to say too, it was really important for us, it was not Sintra that failed the Oddy test. And, going back to communication and stuff, I don't think we in the conservation department realized initially in those 2009 and 2011 batches the specific brand we were testing, because at that point when our fabrications team would go to our distributor and say, I want Sintra, they would give them this expanded PVC board that is not Sintra, but to them it's equivalent. There's no difference. So then our fabrication staff believed that they were using Sintra. But when it failed, we went back and had much more conversation with our fabrications department, and then they subsequently with their distributor, and that's when it all sort of was like, well, it's not actually Sintra, it's Eltec,
Right.
So, I think that just speaks to the importance of checking regular batches.
So, and I have two things I want to say to that. One, relating to the wiki site, which I think is wonderful and going to be really important to everyone, is making sure how clear you are about what exactly you've tested, right? There's that issue. And then the second part, which is something that's really big in my life, is when you're trying to convince your design department and everyone else you work with to change materials potentially, it's a long process, and how much you can give them this Oddy test, which is really like a canary in a coal mine, and it's sort of kind of can be called pseudoscience by some people, and do we really believe in it? And now we're getting we get conflicting results from different people, and so getting them to change puts in a lot of effort, because it's not only cost in terms of materials and so forth, but it's also working methods and the equipment you have to work with, and the time it takes to learn how to put things together in a new way, and what we've been doing before. And it's such a huge process that if you're saying, okay, I've got this material that's failed, let's try to use other stuff that has not failed, and you've reset up everything to use that new material, and suddenly you have a problem with it. So I think that is kind of the core issue as well, is sort of bringing, and I'm sure we're going to be addressing that more, but that is really the big beast, I think. And that
was the point of the adsorbent, is that, they can't not make most of the decks out of the foam board, so we'll just compensate in another way. And so we put the activated carbon in there. And I honestly feel like for us, we may always have to put carbon in our cases. And we have saddles in half our cases. They're off-gassing acidic vapors just by being saddles. So, yeah, it's sort of like neither here nor there ultimately, whether the PVC whether we find Sintra or not. Like, I think we may honestly just continue to put carbon in every case.
Sorry. Is this on? Just to tag on to what Jennifer was saying, and something that Colleen and I didn't bring up in our talk necessarily, but what our hope is that by having more contributions, not just a variety of coming from different institutions or people or whoever, but that the same materials will show up on the database or the tables, and so then it's not just I did this test 3 times or this is my one test and I'm relying on it wholly and solely, but then we'll start to see maybe some trends, or there was a batch of ethafoam that really was not doing well, or I don't know, that anyway is one of our hopes that can come out of the table, so please contribute.
Okay, yes, so the question here, gentleman, second row.
Is that on? Oh, yes. Good. Yeah, I'm Ashton Grew. I'm a preparator. I work at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford. And most of what I was going to say just got covered. So that was a great discussion. Most of the points were made. I guess just to further it, back it up, while working at the Getty, which is a place that has used Sintra and tested it over and over again for like 15 years, I think at least, they tried to sub out stuff on us too. We would get a batch from our same supplier for whatever reason, and usually if you work with it enough, you can tell the difference, but we did test the substitute and it didn't pass. So it's very important that people are going to tell you one thing, but you need to follow up. And one of the things that can be very helpful is the MSDS sheet, because usually it'll say the manufacturer's name on there. And sort of going the other way, just as an interesting aside, I worked briefly on a rehousing move project for the Southwest Museum, which is part of the Autry. And in reviewing all of the materials we were using there, I needed to get a different version of the same thing, which was coroplast, or using coroplast in storage. And as I was getting ready to do that, I found out that in fact we weren't getting coroplast, we were getting Intaplast. And you can grill them, but until you really get down to it and have it in front of you, they'll say, oh yeah, well, that's Intaplast. Luckily, that was passing consistently anyway. So it wasn't the name brand, but it was passing. So that's just another plug for doing testing whenever possible and letting other people know.
Yes, Pam, here.
Hi, I'm Pam Hatchfield. What were we supposed to say? Objects Conservator, Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. I really enjoyed all these presentations, and I have a question or a comment for 2 of the 3 groups. And the first one is for you guys at the Autry Museum. I was really, really interested that your paint somehow got into California with all their stringent VOC testing, but did not pass the Oddy test. So I wondered if you could comment on that. And then the second thing is really a comment for Samantha and you guys, and that is that, and for everybody here actually, if you love the wiki and you love the idea of sharing this information, which I really do, I just want to point out that FAIC, the Foundation of the American Institute for Conservation, supports and funds that and a whole lot of other activities like this one here today. And so you should consider donating. In many ways, you can donate with your time and contribute to the wiki, or go to your pocketbook. So anyway, that was a brief commercial.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're still confounded by the paint situation. I honestly, we don't have the capacity to, we don't have the staff time and the equipment to do further analytical testing on the paint samples. We can just kind of get enough information to know if we can go ahead and use it. I wonder if it's because so much of the formulations have changed for California that, maybe the paint isn't creating the same sort of film that it used to, so that, more is able to come off of the paint continuously. I don't know. These are all just sort of speculations on my part. I would love for someone to figure that out, though, because it may not be the VOC that's causing the corrosion necessarily.
I just want to say also that a lot of these more quote-unquote sustainable paints that have come out, low VOC paints, are actually not really necessarily low VOC paints. They are what I would call slow VOC paints, in that they take a longer time for these substances, the plasticizers and so forth, to come out of the paint, and that's how they get around some of the regulations. I have no idea if that's what's going on with that paint, because I'm not familiar with it. But, Alexandra Schuick, and I think I said her name wrong, she's German, she's done a wonderful article on this pretty recently, and if you come see me, I'll dig up the reference.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you. And I do, there was another thing about the paint that just slipped my mind now. Oh, at this point, we already are waiting 4 weeks after we paint a deck, before we put the bonnet on it, and that's how long we waited for these Oddy tests. So if it really is taking that much longer to create a film and to have the lower VOCs vapor off, we can't wait 2 months to let the paint dry. I think we'd go nuts. It just wouldn't work in our timeline.
So any other comments from the panel on those issues? If not, we'll move to another question. Yes, this gentleman here first.
I'm Ed Light, actually an industrial hygienist with Building Dynamics. We've been developing a protocol for air corrosivity in buildings in general and starting to look at museums. And the discussion so far has been evaluating emissions from individual components. I'm wondering, has there been any work to actually measure the air quality, the corrosivity in the cabinets as a whole, the cabinets with contents, and the background indoor air migrating into the cabinets? And I think the Oddy test will be nowhere near sensitive enough to do that. So any ideas on that? Okay. And I had one other question, which is kind of general, is what do you think the Lone Ranger would have done with Nixon if he knew about Watergate?
Okay, question here, yes.
Actually, it's more of a comment. Our designers, I'm Shelley Payne, the Field Museum. The exhibition designers wanted to use a zero VOC paint that had been used at the previous venue for the Greeks exhibit, which opens next week at the Field Museum in Chicago. And they wanted to put it on the walls without allowing our normal 2-week curing time. So I ran it, and it passed after a 3-day cure. So this kind of raised their interest in this paint as a material to potentially go inside of the case. So today, we initiated a test where that zero VOC paint was tested at 4 weeks, 3 week, 2 week, 1 week, and 3-day cure to see if there's any difference in the outcome of the results, and we'll know in 30 days.
So what was the name of the brand name of the paint?
Oops, I don't know that, but I can send it to you.
That would be wonderful.
I would be happy to.
Thank
I
you.
believe it was a Benjamin Moore paint.
It was, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe like Aura or something like that.
I wouldn't want to say unless I
Okay.
was sure, but I will definitely send that to you.
Oh, yeah, it might still be different.
Yes, gentleman here.
John Twilley, independent conservation scientist. I just wanted to address the issue of the different criteria that have been discussed for California and the idea of VOC a low VOC material being necessarily less harmful. I think it's important to keep in mind that there are at least 3 different categories of parameters that are being discussed here. Not explicitly addressed is that of what the MSDS is intended to cover, which is health safety for individuals. VOC requirements generally have to do with atmospheric chemistry. They have to do fundamentally, particularly in California in their early days, with mitigating ozone and nitrogen oxide formations under the influence of sunlight. They don't have anything to do with interior airspace. So the restrictions initially had to do with eliminating release to the environment of things which in subsequent reactions would be harmful to the air pollution problems, but not specifically the issues that we're addressing here.
Right. Just a question from me for sort of a general survey of the panel. How frequently do you retest? And is it driven mostly by an exhibition case that you're trying to build and realize you have a new batch? Or is it because you have a schedule that's set up for every 3 years, 4 years, 2 years? You go back and retest materials? Any comments?
Yeah, we have a schedule. It's like we get an alert every 3 years. No, I wish that we could. Yeah, and that's, obviously one of the big issues. So yeah, our work really is driven by the exhibition schedule. If we have the staff and if we hear something like this whole thing with this foam and that board and whatnot, naming no names, we might take it, run another test on what we have at that time.
Yeah, if we hear there's a problem or something, just a buzz amongst friends and colleagues, like we did retest Sintra recently because someone else had said that they heard that from this distributor on this line and during this periods, we did retest specifically for pieces that were being borrowed, and Sintra did test okay. But then we recently heard about another product that we want to test because we'd all assumed that it was doing fine. So it's kind of when we hear about it.
But that's the thing, is you can't ever. That's one of the cruxes of the problem, and we've tested other brands of the rigid PVC as well. I had a general question too, if there's time for it, but others might want to.
Yeah, it's a panel for discussion, so we can discuss.
I think for us, it's much the same. And, like something comes up, someone hears something, and it's like, well, it's been a couple years. Let's retest this material. Now that we have on our list of this column that gives the date, it's easier for us to realize it's been a while since we've retested something. I think if we did, sometimes it's just as casual as like I was walking through storage and I saw a giant thing of foam and it came from Uline, but I thought we used to get it from somewhere else. We should test this one.
Or it's yellowing or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wonder about because we have almost 900 test results in our gigantic Excel database stuff that dates back to 2002. And I wonder about putting some of this really old information up into the wiki site, because it might not be relevant anymore because that was so long ago. And do we want those kind of old results in?
Well, I think one of the things that we were just actually talking about at lunch that we might put on the wiki, and this is where feedback is important from everyone to hear, but maybe a section where people can kind of have alerts if they find that a material that usually tests well isn't, or if there's a certain batch, or so that maybe those conversations can start going and people can start retesting things.
Yeah, and Colleen and I had talked about kind of whatever outdated Oddy test results are, whenever you say they're outdated. And to be honest, we don't have enough on there to have an outdated section.
We'll take something from 2002.
Yeah. So, but we wanted to maintain as much as possible a history because, some materials you buy they've been in the lab since, I don't know, before 2002, and do I want to keep using it, or like, I don't know. We thought that there could still be a potential use, maybe not necessarily for things that get used up quickly, but I have this old fabric lying around from Creation Bauman, I should see if it's okay. Maybe somebody did a test on the stuff they were making in 2002. I don't know. I'm a conservator, I don't like throwing things away, so. I mean, if we get to that point where we're like, oh my God, we have too much information, there can be an outdated section or something, I don't know.
You can call them.
We can figure it out, the historical data.
So there's a question here, and then we'll take you. So.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Julie Laufenberger, an objects conservator at the Walters Art Museum, and thank you all. I've been hearing a lot about the PVC boards, et cetera, and I'm feeling a little lonely here because we use Comatex, which is yet another one of, but I haven't heard anyone mention it here. We are having troubles with it, so this is in part, why I'm here. We've got lots of tarnishing of silver, and I know that's been floating around there. So I guess just wondering, did you all test Comatex? And I guess in the past, I was, of course, naively thinking it was similar and the same enough, or thinking that Sinter wasn't available, so we just rolled into Comatex and we just stayed there. So obviously now we're revisiting. Did any of you look at Comatex specifically? Could you comment?
Yeah. We did, Julie, and it had passed.
I think so.
Yeah, so, I mean, and I think that was just by chance we realized that that's what was coming into the shop. Mm-hmm. So this can happen to anyone that, you think it's just a different brand of the same material. But of course, it's not like they're medical products. Yeah, but we did test it several times.
Mm-hmm. This is my second question, so I feel lucky. Lauren Schill, Museum of the Bible and the Registrar. With this development of the AIC wiki, which I'm really happy about, by the way, do you think there might be a platform for us to be able to develop almost like an Angie's List of vendors and materials and testing kind of as we go along? I know that, obviously this is all like unofficial, but just so when we're looking at new vendors or looking at people that we've had dealings with in the past, kind of see who else may have had issues in the past with the same people, that kind of thing.
I think that gets into kind of murky territory, and just related to that, one of the questions that I've been having is how many institutions, as I said, I'm very excited about the wiki site, but I'm also very conflicted, and I hope somebody else will make the decision for me. So I'm curious, just to sort of over time, or maybe we can get a sense from the folks who are in the room today of how various institutions feel about putting their data online, and could it be anonymous? And the other thing I just wanted to point out was that since we've gone through several different protocols, that's the other thing that we made a point of actually going back and updating our spreadsheet so so we're clear on which protocol we used for which test, for which we got what results. But I think that, we're a small enough community. I think we contact each other frequently anyway, and I would just stick to that if you're talking about dealing with vendors.
Yes, last question.
Hey, Wendy Jaz, conservator in private practice in Arlington, Virginia. You brought up an issue about this old fabric that might be in the lab. I'm often thinking that we're going to be, that some institutions are buying things in larger quantities and are holding on to things, and the packaging that this material may come in, while the material may be tested, but it may be stored for extended periods of time in the packaging. And I'm wondering whether you've looked at any of this, because I think, I've had the opportunity to test, matting and hinging materials and all of that other stuff. And the stuff that's coming in brand new that we take out of the packaging is fine. But if it's been sitting around for a while, because of acid migration or whatever, we've had some of these problems. So I wonder whether you could maybe address the issue of storage of the good, of the materials that have passed, and whether there are some things that you're thinking about in that way.
Well, I would just say that that's another great thing about having shared data, is so if we could record when we bought that product, what vendor we actually bought it from, and when it came into the lab or the shop or what have you, and then when we tested it, that would be very useful data.
Yeah, so there are places for all of that information on the wiki tables. There's also a column for any additional notes. So most of the fabrics in Cleveland, they're washed before they're used, and so information about how the fabrics are washed. Is the British Museum, they do their paints outs a certain way. That information is captured on there. Different ways so that's where the protocols and information gathered on the tables are really important. So I would say, in the notes section, then you can add this fabric was stored in the lab for 20 years in the plastic wrapper and it tested and it failed, or whatever.